Welcome to the Scholar's Chair, an Interfaith Dialogue, August 27, 2023. Our topic is How does faith inform believers of the imperative to acquire knowledge?
Reason
Our opening
why
presenter is Dr.
people are
Wendell
destroyed. He
Fuller.
says in Hosea 4:6, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. In Ecclesiastes, it talks about how wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that it preserves life to him who has it. And then Proverbs, it says, take instruction instead of money or silver, instead of choice gold.
Hmm.
In the epistles of Paul and in the gospel, there's also this command in Paul's prayer in Colossians 1:9. It says, and so from the day we heard, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding. And the renewal process that's described by Christian theologians is called, and it's explained in Romans 12:2, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now, in the Quran, Allah is also clear, like our brother Dawood made clear in the beginning, the first revelation that came from the angel Jibril alayhi salam was proclaim or read in the name of your Lord and Cherisher who created man of a mere congealed blood, a cloud of mere congealed blood. Proclaim, and thy Lord is most bountiful. He who taught the use of the pen taught man which he knew. Again, that word knowledge, what he knew not. And Prophet Muhammad made it clear, Ali, in the early days of the Ummah in Islam, the Prophet Muhammad took Ali and set him aside and said, devote yourselves to study so that when they come back from the self-defense that they were engaged in, he could instruct them. So you can't see the slide here, but the educational attainment or knowledge actually has some huge financial impact. With a doctoral degree, let's look here. The median weekly earnings is about almost $2,000, versus a bachelor's degree is about $1,300, versus a high school diploma, which is about $800, versus less than a high school diploma is about $600. And the unemployment rate kind of goes like a stair step down from the educational rate, and this includes the trades as well. I would say some college or associate's degree level, but it's kind of a stair step where it goes for less than high school diploma, it's 8.3% down to 1.5% with a doctoral degree. And right now, U.S. adults over 25 with an associate's or higher, the top of that list is Asians with about 78%. But the bottom would be Hispanics and African Americans and Pacific Islanders, with less than 30% in some instances. And then also, and this has a huge impact on, COVID has also kind of thrown a loop into this process, both for religious learning institutions as well as educational institutions. Many churches, mosques, synagogues, temples were closed during COVID, and there's a huge impact on uh, the religious resiliency to combat challenges and things like that. And also in public schools, there's been about a 50-point drop in the proficiency level and about a 60-point drop for reading, for math, excuse me, and about a 60-point drop in the proficiency level for reading since the pandemic. Also, more and more young adults are unaffiliated, and I think the religious leaders on the call can attest to this, that more and more young people are not really following the traditions or the traditional institutional um, format that religion has traditionally played. Many of them consider themselves spiritual or, um, unaffiliated. And right now we have, in 1990, we had about 3% of 65 or older and about 10% of 18 to 29 consider themselves unaffiliated. And in 2020, we have about 40%, which is more than a third of 18 to 29-year-olds unaffiliated with any religious institution or religious faith. And about 29% of those 30 to 49, and almost 10% higher for 65 and older, about 13% are unaffiliated. So what happens is this knowledge that has been permeating society and has been the foundation of both Islamic society, Judeo-Christian society, and even Eastern society, Oriental society with Chinese and Japanese and Hindu society. The West, here in the West, we've seen an erosion of that, both through COVID and also through the decrease in higher education, trades work, and religious institutions. There's been an erosion. And I think religious scholars have to kind of get in the game maybe a little bit late and say, hey, we need to talk about our clergy getting educated. We have to talk about our young people getting educated. We have to talk about tutoring. When I was a kid, the reason I was able to get through algebra in the ninth grade is because I went tutoring at my mom's church. They had trailers outside the church, and every Saturday we'd have tutoring from 9 to 12. And those institutional benefits are no longer really as viable or as appealing to the masses as they once were. So okay. I'll stop there and let you go ahead.
Dr. Fuller, thank you for your brief comment. I know that we feel very, very, it's a very tight format. 30 minutes is hardly enough time to discuss the topic, and particularly a 5-minute presentation. But thank you for that. And the reason Dr. Fuller sounds like a research person is because he is the founder of the Institute of Economics and Educational Development. So that's one of the reasons why he comes to the discussion with not only the background of Islam, but also he's an educator and he heads of this particular institution. So thank you for that research. However, I think that there are a lot of people on the flip side of the argument would suggest that religion is the problem. To gather things like the scientific method, etc., and that we find people who are from what they think is religious sentiment or religious knowledge tend to make some really poor choices based on the fact they don't know their religion very well. Dr. Bell, this sounds like a lot of conversations we have had over the years. So yes. Let me bring you to the conversation and get your thoughts on that.
I thank you for inviting me to the conversation, Brother Khalil. And with the question, faith informs us. How does faith inform us of the moral imperative to acquire knowledge? From my readings and my experience, faith is either neutral or has a negative correlation to gaining knowledge. Mm-hmm. I'll say that again. Faith is neutral or has a negative correlation to gaining knowledge. I mean, even if you start in the Christian Bible, Adam and Eve are told, do not eat of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. You're already told, stay ignorant. All right, that's one of the prime directives that put us in the position we're in now as being able that we do die. Just now, let's set that aside. That's religious. I want to come to the modern day. But first of all, let's go to Islam. The prophet was told to read, all right? He couldn't read at the time. He was an ignorant man. The prophet was an illiterate prophet. But what he did was to give some instructions to his people. But what do you have now going on in the major parts of the Arab world? Women are taken out of school. There is no value given in giving them anything beyond how to cook and be a wife or husband. All right. This idea of education, education for what? Now, we have to understand what the role of education was. But although you may find something that Paul said, and Paul told the women, hey, you can't even teach these in the churches and whatnot, but that's all that put aside. Now let's come to the modern day. Education is and has been for the generations back for those who are the elite, the leaders. All right, that's where it's been. Moses got his education out of the kings of Egypt, all right? Other people got their education for what they were slated to do. You be a carpenter, you be a sandman, you be a messenger. Hey, education that you are talking about was given or divined no earlier than in the 1800s here in America. By the way, the man who started the education was a Unitarian out of Massachusetts. He advocated that all kids be trained or educated at the cost of the state. The state will be responsible. Before that, any family do what you need to do. And before this, only the rulers or the controllers were the educated ones. The Bible was chained. The common man couldn't get the Bible up until about the 1800s to read. Education, at best, was only a neutral factor in being a moral thing.
Interesting. Hold the pen right there, because I think you have a lot to say about the subject. Martha, I'm inviting you into the ship now.
Okay. I hardly know where to start. Let me.
Good. That's a good place to
thoughts
start.
running around in my head. One being, and for anybody who isn't aware of this, my mother was Methodist. My father was Catholic. I was raised in the Catholic faith. Married a man who is a Jew, and we raised our children in the Jewish faith. And eventually, I converted, and so I have a number of different perspectives that come to this. Certainly being raised Catholic, and particularly Catholic back in the day, I'm thinking about, Galileo, saying, but, the earth rotates around the sun, not the other way around. And, for his trouble was thrown into prison. I'm not sure what else happened. One of the things I do want to give credit to the Catholic Church about is they never argued about evolution. The idea that you could accept evolution and still have faith did not become a divisive issue with the Catholic Church. And for that, I give them a lot of credit. Had I not married my husband, I don't know where I would be as far as Catholicism is concerned at this point, but that's another discussion. Coming under the heading of learn something new every day, I was doing some reading before this and came across an article that talked about Jews as the people of the book, which is an expression I had heard many times before. This article indicated that Jews being described as the people of the book actually came from Islam, because we were the first recipients of, or maybe the first people who wrote it down. I'm not exactly sure, but I just thought that was very interesting. I'd never really understood that before. In Judaism, questioning is embedded in Judaism. in the Passover, whether historically it happened or not, is our kind of our signature event. And in the Haggadah, which is what we use to celebrate Passover, there are the 4 questions, and the 4 questions are to be asked by the youngest child. And so we're not only talking about, we're not only commanded for us to tell the story, we adults to tell the story, we're also commanded to have our children ask us, what does this mean? Why are we talking about this? What difference does it make? I do remember the first time my husband told me that you could be a Jew and not necessarily believe in God. And, coming from a Catholic background, that I could, it was hard for me to wrap my head around that. But I will also say at the same time that, again, there is a, and I had culture, maybe the wrong word, I'm not exactly sure, but there is a sense of don't ask a Jew to accept something on faith. Because they're going to, and maybe why there's so many Jewish lawyers, I don't know, but it's no, we're going to have to talk about this. We're going to have to discuss this. We're going to have to get into the minutia of this discussion ad nauseum sometimes, much like the rabbis have done with much of the stuff that comes to us from the Hebrew Bible. There's, if you look at the commentary, and I'm not a Jewish scholar, I have to say that off right at the start, but many times, the rabbis really struggle with some of the things that are written down in the Hebrew Bible, and they set these fences up so that we don't really go out and stone that rebellious child at the city gates. Yes. Because it is okay to question, and if you question, then perhaps you can come to a better understanding. So I want to finish up with 2 things. One is a quote by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory. And this is just a piece of a larger quote, but he says, in Judaism, our highest duty is to seek to understand the will of God, not just to blindly obey. And I think, there's a lot of wisdom that's just in that little blip there, because so often I think people say, but this is the will of God. And I think, not in my universe anyway. Yeah. The other one comes from, it's called the Sayings of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot in Hebrew. And it's one of the instructions, and it says, make for yourself a teacher. And the question is, so why that phrase, make for yourself a teacher? And the explanation of that is you can make anyone your teacher as long as you are willing to learn from that person. Good. And I would also add, sometimes what you learn is, I don't want to be that way. I don't want to be like that person. I want to choose a different road. But again, we can, as long as we are willing to listen, and as long as we are willing to listen with an open heart, would be my other point. We have to be open to what other people have to say.
Martha, that you're giving a whole reason for our dialogue. That's excellent. And sure, questioning is what we need to do more of. I quite agree. I want to bring in Idris here. He's one of our imams in the local area. Brother Idris Bridges has a very, very large background, and I won't go through it at this point. But I wanted to say that he is a person who is one of my favorite imams. So Idris, you have a few moments here.
Thank you so much, Brother Shadid. I'd like to give greetings to all of the other guests on your program. This is such a rich discussion for me. One, when we start to take a look at knowledge, I like to say that knowledge is just one step in our journey. The Quran speaks about knowledge, and one particular verse that really struck me, especially when I read, the question. This verse says that the people did not become separated until knowledge came to them. So knowledge, in and of itself, is just one piece of the puzzle. Because we have a lot of people who are extremely knowledgeable about a lot of things, but what do they do with that information? The question for me is, does it benefit not only themselves, but is it beneficial to humanity? Is it being used for good? Is the question. And in the Quran also, Allah speaks about how people's hearts, when they deviate. So it's having knowledge of a thing, but is your heart right? What are you doing with what you've been blessed with is the question for me. So that's just one piece, because I'm not going to be long, that I'm interested in hearing what Dr. Fuller has to say about that particular verse when it speaks about knowledge and people becoming separated. But also, as I get ready to close, I always like to bring this into the discussion when we talk about the first revelation to Prophet Muhammad, prayers and peace be upon him, with Iqra, and people will say that it means read. Yes, that's one reading of that, or one translation of that, but that word means so much. It also means to gather and to accrue. That's what Iqra means, to gather and to accrue. And then to tie that into, once you're accruing and you're getting this information, then how are you going to implement what you have now into society? And I'll close with this. I grew up in a Southern Baptist tradition, and one verse that comes to my mind is, which a lot of you all know this, is seek knowledge, but of all you getting understanding of that. And in the Quran, in Arabic, that word is hikmah. Now we're moving from knowledge to now wisdom. So knowledge, again, as I close, knowledge is just one step in the journey. The objective for me is to be wise, to be able to use that knowledge to benefit not only yourselves, but humanity.
Wow, excellent. I think that is a wonderful statement, and I am glad you refer to the Quran, as you always do. And I want to follow up with Dr. Fuller and see what's your response to Brother Idris's comment that knowledge can be divisive as well, according to the Quran.
There's two ways. I mean, he's right that knowledge is a step. Every mental process that we go through, I'm not sure if people are familiar with the Supreme Mathematics. But the Supreme Mathematics talks about, you go from knowledge to wisdom to understanding, then it becomes a part of your culture, then you refine it, then you become an equal in that system of knowledge, then you manifest the divine or God, then you use that manifestation of divine or God to build or destroy, and then that knowledge then becomes born, starting from knowledge all the way to born. And then knowledge being division, usually what happens is we see knowledge as a tree. The root is God, Allah, Jehovah, Yahweh. We all take our piece of that tree. We take our branch and we go and plant it and have a big tree party, and we call it church or the mosque or the synagogue or the temple. And but at the end of the day, at the root of all of these systems of knowledge, whether it be science or religion, there's a basic understanding, a basic function, and a basic process that they all basically share. And like Allah said in the Quran, they didn't become divided until knowledge reached them. The reason they became divided is because they took a small snapshot of that knowledge and said, this is for me. So like you have a Methodist, Luther said Catholic was wrong, and then Calvin said that Luther was wrong, or, Shia said the Sunni was wrong, and it basically created a division because people decided to focus on the subservient or the byproduct knowledge instead of focusing on the root, which is the causeless cause, which is God.
Excellent. Reverend Weir, do you concur with the idea that faith can be used to be divisive and as well as acquiring knowledge, but faith can be perceived as divisive, but it also can be used as a unifier? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think, that's that's kind of, when we're working to acquire the knowledge, I really appreciated what Idris said about it's about what you do with that knowledge. That once we have obtained this knowledge, that it's then kind of the ball is in our court. And I really think that that's where our faith steps in and where we're called to live into our faith. Because then our faith informs us, do we use this knowledge as a means of getting our own way, right? Do I use this knowledge so that I, quote, win, whether that's an argument or a dispute or something going on? Or do I use this knowledge in a way in which it will benefit, everyone, right? We're all created in the image of God. We are all brothers and sisters. And it is our duty to care for our neighbors. I really did a lot of thinking about the greatest commandment around these. Jesus said the greatest commandment is to love God, and the second is just like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And I have a friend who's in a cohort called Creating a Culture of Renewal. And one of the things that cohort does is it actually reframes the golden rule from do unto others as you would have them do unto you, to treat others how they want to be treated. And, I really think that that's that nuance of what are we doing with this knowledge? Are we using this knowledge to then go and treat others how they want to be treated, to grow in relationship with one another, to have a better understanding of the perspective that someone is coming through? Or are we going to use it to further entrench ourselves and further divide ourselves?
Yes.
And I think that's where our the moral imperative is then to use it for the good, to use it as a unifier and not as a divider.
I quite agree. I wish more people heard that sermon. Daoud, I'll give you the last 2 minutes we have.
Okay, so I'll try to make this brief. I don't want to repeat a lot of things that have been said. I just think it's worth noting from a Muslim and Islamic perspective that the first revelation from Allah through the angel Jibril to the Prophet Muhammad was to read or recite, and the whole idea of knowledge, the recognition of the intellect is absolutely part of the revelation of the Quran. The Prophet Muhammad, this idea of beneficial knowledge is throughout the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, not only his sayings, but his actions, not just knowledge for knowledge's sake, but knowledge that will benefit the community and ultimately creation, because the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran, the Prophet Muhammad is the prophet for all people from our belief system, and the Quran is the final revelation for all mankind. I did feel the need. I appreciate having Dr. Bell here. I have the need to just sort of make a comment about the Quran is the final revelation. There are some things from previous revelations that are not included in the Quran, specifically this story of Adam and Eve not to learn about good and evil, not to acquire knowledge. That story is specifically not in the Quran. So that Allah says in the Quran that that the Quran was revealed, and there are some things that are confirmed and some things that are passed over, and that's one of the things that's passed over. And then one of the other things, I think there's a tendency for people to conflate being an Arab with being a Muslim. I heard Dr. Bell sort of make that comment, is that the Arabs are like 10% of the Muslim world, even though they're on center stage in the Middle East, they're only 10% of the Muslim world. So it's not necessarily appropriate to equate what Arabs are doing necessarily with synonymous with being Muslim.